website set up as well. We are also broadcasting from Pal Talk, and in case there are some other people who also have some questions for you.
Okay.
It is Tuesday, June 10th, approximately 7 o'clock p.m. Central Time. Let's get right to those questions. I've received quite a few questions via email from people who have been listening to the program and have written in some of their questions for you. First question is, which comes from an individual who refers to themselves as victim of white supremacy. Actually, this person has several questions for you, Mr. Fuller. First question is, under the system of white supremacy, do close attachments between white individuals and victims of racism have adverse effects on the non-white people? If so, why?
Well, it depends on what you mean by close attachments.
Now, see, this is interesting because I looked over some of the questions that the person sent in, and I sent them an email stating that, well, because of how the questions are phrased, that you may even have questions about their questions because they're not clear.
Okay, well, there is a codified outline, or rather a number of suggestions that has to do with what the interaction should be. That's the way I choose to, based on logic, choose to phrase it, interaction.
Okay.
Interaction between white persons and non-white persons during the existence of the system of white supremacy. That's what it comes down to. What should the interactions be? One is the white person is supposed to give constructive information. Any constructive information that the white person has should be relayed immediately to whatever non-white person they happen to be interacting with. If the information is constructive.
Right.
There's a cliche saying that information is power. So if you're getting constructive information from a white person all the time, or whatever time the white person has constructive information, when it comes in, when they have, when they have learned some information that is constructive, and there's any reason, either directly or indirectly, to believe that that constructive information would also be of constructive help to whatever non-white person they're interacting with. And that should be the interaction, by the way. Constructive information, interaction. Then that information should be given to the non-white person. The other thing is, the white person should never say anything to the non-white person that is not true. Now, those two things are basic. Now, there are many other things that are do's and don'ts.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the two that are real important. Don't withhold constructive information. Transfer that information immediately to the non-white person, and the non-white person will ascertain whether or not he or she wants to use it. But at least he or she will have that information. That would be something that they didn't know before, that they know now, that may be of constructive value if they choose to use it so. The other thing is, they haven't been lied to. They hasn't been told anything that's not true by the white person that they're interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is what you might call a constructive compensatory interaction between white and non-white during the existence of white supremacy. In fact, it's a constructive person. I mean, when I'm looking for constructive information, this is the person that gives it to me. And I can always rely on this person not to say anything to me that's not true. If I ask them a question and they don't have the answer, they just say they don't have the answer, and then they're supposed to, if I'm having a constructive interaction with this person, be going around trying to find out. And the next time they see me or make contact with me, they're supposed to be trying to give me that information that I was seeking. Now that is a constructive interaction. And I think that would go a long ways toward helping to solve the problems or at least answer the questions that black people would have about what you do when you're around white folks. Or what should the interaction be? Or what is a close relationship? Oh yes, that's a close relationship. That's as close as it needs to be. Doesn't need to be any closer than that. If you want to use the word close, or whatever the scenario was at the beginning of this exchange of views. I forgot exactly what the words were used, but I choose to say constructive interaction. That's what it's supposed to be. All interactions is supposed to be of constructive value. Never anything that's non-constructive. Never.
Those were the words that were used, close attachments.
Oh, close attachments. Well, the so-called close attachments is supposed to be all about constructive information. And no telling of falsehoods, no transfers of information that's false.
Okay. Second question is, would Mr. Fuller discourage non-white individuals from spending voluntary and or leisure time with white people if racism, white supremacy is not being discussed? Now, I think you just answered that question.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The whole interaction is supposed to be just what I just said. That's the whole thing. There can be some other nuances and all like that, but basically that's what it's about. Just lounging around the swimming pool, I mean, hey, that's not, unless there is some information being imparted around the swimming pool.
So it's not
constructive information. If you all a person has to do is say, well, I'm around these white people, I'm around my associates, business associates, or people that they say are my friends or trying to be my friends and all like that. Just ask yourself, am I getting constructive information from these people that I'm looking at? Are they giving me constructive information that I can leave here and use? And it has a constructive result. I mean, they're the answers to most of the problems that I have. Can I find the answers here with the people that I'm here, standing around, at this gathering in a hotel lobby or wherever it is? I mean, you're in their presence. Just ask yourself, am I getting constructive information? Am I getting constructive information? If you're not getting constructive information, then what are you doing there? You should ask yourself that. What is this about? Do you need to be somewhere else where something constructive is happening? It's real simple. It's not complicated at all. That's all you need to ask yourself. One thing you do know is that you're there. You're present. You say, okay, I'm here. And I'm non-white. And there are white people here. And they are talking to me, and I am talking to them. Now, in all of this talk, am I getting constructive information? Information that I can take and use to better my position on this planet or on any other planet. And the other question is, naturally, whatever's being said to me, am I being lied to? Am I being deceived? information. That's the reason for communicating. That's all that it's supposed to be about. You don't need anything else. And if you do need something else like what? You certainly don't need any more troubles or anything more to worry about. Conditions being what they are.
All right, another question is, the person says, it has been my observation that white people insist that non-whites are more informed than white people about racism, white supremacy. What it is and how it works. Why do you think, Mr. Fuller, white people insist that non-whites are more knowledgeable about white supremacy? That's the question.
Well, I don't know. I have my suspicions, but the best way to find out is simply ask the white people who are making these statements. Was the statement that white people insist that non-white people be more knowledgeable? Was that the question?
Yeah, that non-white people are more knowledgeable than white people about racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works.
Oh, but that's not so. Not if the white people are white supremacists. Now, if the white people are not white supremacists, then that might be true.
Mm-hmm.
But the assumption is that if a white person knows enough about white supremacy to know that white supremacy exists, they know enough about white supremacy. And they probably know more than the non-white people.
All right.
So that would make them a racist suspect, for sure, if they would claim to know what they don't know. Or rather, claim to not know what they do know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the correct way to say it.
Right. I think this
of course, they would be racist suspects anyway under the system of white supremacy, according to compensatory counter-racist logic. Any white person who is able to be a racist probably is one. That's just a flat statement, and that's a statement that is logical during the existence of white supremacy.
Do you think, Mr. Fuller, do you think victims of racism would be more receptive to the code system concept if you did not refer to non-white people as silly, pitiful, and ignorant? That's one of the questions that the person poses.
You don't necessarily have to do that. See, the code book is about thought, speech, and our action. So that is a suggestion that you think that way because that is true. That's either, or rather, it's true or false. The logic tells me that it's true. Pitiful, primitive, silly, and are stupid. Now, the pitiful, according to what I've written, it's all non-white people. Pitiful meaning what? Worthy of being pitied. Anytime you're in a weak position, you're in a begging position, give me an education, give me a job, give me a house. If the flood comes, get me out off the rooftop. Get me away from the water. Tell me where I can go to have some fun. Pick any area of activity. When you're constantly begging someone who is, by the evidence, hostile to you and does not wish the best for you, that puts you in a pitiful position. And you are indeed a pitiful person, meaning worthy of man anything.
Mm-hmm.
They are in position to ask. And when you have to ask twice, that's begging.
Asking twice is begging?
Sure. That, logically speaking, that would be, that's if the person heard you ask the first time.
Right, right.
You asked once, and then you didn't get it. Then when you ask the second time, it means you're begging, because now the person has heard you the first time and didn't act on what you asked for. If they acted on what you asked for, you didn't have to ask the second time.
Mm-hmm.
So we, are, logically speaking, pitiful people, beggars. Please give us this, please do that. Please let me out of jail. Please don't put me in jail. Now, non-white people do make demands on each other, like slaves at the bottom of the ship. And the hatches close. They can beat up on each other with the chains and whatnot that they have available to them. They can kick and scratch. And they can make demands. One person might overpower the other about what food is available and whatnot. Take the food and eat it themselves. But they are in no position to make demands on the captain or any of the crew. The white supremacists, because they run the ship. All of the evidence shows that worldwide.
One of the other questions is, do you think that non-white males engage in anti-sexual behavior as a means of escaping the abuse of white supremacy or to appear less threatening?
A lot of evidence seems to point to that. A lot of non-white males have names that, in the English language, that take the case of my name, Neely. See that the C-I-E or Lee, and they kind of denote the feminine tone. A lot of black females like to give their boys, and in this day and time it's even getting worse in the northwestern hemisphere, because they are some of the first people to put the earrings in the boys' ears. It's the black females in the house. Lots of girls in the house, females, mothers of female, no male in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So the black male's hair is getting longer, hanging down on his shoulders and whatnot. He's got all of the sports people and whatnot, got earrings in their ears, earpieces, and off distance, and it doesn't have to be a great distance, a half a block away. You can't tell the difference between them and their sisters.
Yeah.
And that is to give the appearance. The white supremacists, under the system of white supremacy, has always wanted the black male to be either effeminate or a thug. Take your choice. You're not supposed to be just what they might call a rational person. You're supposed to come across as some type of wild animal, a dress, even for just a few minutes or something. It's act like a female for a little while anyway, so that that image will be in the minds of people. That's what they'll mostly remember you for. You can go down a list of names of black actors who have already done that. There's very few who haven't. Played in a movie where they had to put on a wig like a female, earpieces, lipstick, sometimes a dress. Then you're acceptable. And if you don't want to do that, then you got to be a monster. You got to play the part of something, that's coming out of the Black Lagoon or something, and tearing up cars, and if not just an out-and-out monster, then some type of thug, some type of strong animal without a mind, just stomping on things and shooting guns and turning over cars and roaring and cursing and snorting.
Is that monster or monstrosity?
Monsters are monstrosities. Now, under the system of white supremacy, according to the code, if you are subject to white supremacy, a non-white person, you are in the category of either a monster or a monstrosity. Now, I myself, under the monstrosity category, the very fact that here in 2008 makes me a monstrosity, talking about how to replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice in 2008. That makes me a monstrosity. I am not supposed to be doing this if you go by the reason that I was put into the universe, theoretically, if everything was the way it ought to be. I'm supposed to be somewhere growing asparagus or doing something other than trying to undo something that never should have been done in the first place. So all non-white people in the category of being monstrosities, regardless, we can't escape that, or in the category of being monsters. Now, what would make me a monster? And that is if I went around, like I said, thugging, robbing, stealing, drive-by shooting. Now I've turned into a monster, because that is of no constructive value at all. None. Just running wild. Sitting around all day, with a needle in my arm or snorting cocaine. Now I have turned into a monster or a monstrosity, and I'm a monstrosity. I'm a monster if I do anything to harm somebody, harm someone. And that includes myself. And, it's a combination of, it's monster and or monstrosity. You might alternate between the two. That's the only type of non-white person that a system of white supremacy produces. Monsters and or monstrosities. They don't allow anything else. I'm a monstrosity when I'm very servile. I just gave up, and I said, well, you white people just do anything you want to do, and I'll just go along with it, and I'll help you do it. Just tell me what to do, and I'm not going to make no trouble. Now I've turned into a monstrosity. Full time. Because they don't allow anything else. Why is this? Because the system is set up just for that. It's set up not to allow anything else. So I have to be in one of those categories regardless of what I do. I can't escape that. The only way I can escape that is not to be subject to white supremacy.
Yeah, I'd like to take a minute and welcome the people that we have in the Countering Racism group: Michael Fisher, Megaflex, and Initial. We're broadcasting live from the Counter Racism Radio Network. And we also have Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. on the line with us. If you have any questions for Mr. Fuller, don't hesitate to raise your hand and come to the mic, and you can ask your questions directly to Mr. Fuller. Ms. Fuller, there are a few more questions that were emailed into the radio station, but before we get to those, Michael Fisher has his hand up. So, Michael Fisher, it's your mic, sir.
Yes, good day. Thank you for being with us again, Mr. Fuller. I have one question. You often refer to the fact that you say that the white supremacists only have one plan for black males in the northwestern hemisphere, and that is to put them in prison. What led you to that conclusion? That's my question. Thank you.
That's the basic plan for the future. In other words, I'm talking about the greater number, because they are not preparing black people for anything. Just look around on the basis of evidence. Now, they do have some showcases. The showcases of people that you just pull out of line, out of a mass of people. See, the system of white supremacy, like any business, runs on percentages. So you will have a number of black people, like in any prison, you'll have a number of black people who will be considered worthy of being trustees. In fact, they will be given the run of the grounds within certain restrictive covenants, that is, restrictive requirements, like in any prison. The system of white supremacy is a prison system. So you line everybody up every now and then, and you go down the line, and you got 300 people there. So you say, okay, I need about 30 of these people out of the 300. Take 10 from each group of 100 and assign them to do office work or whatever. And it helps to run the prison smoothly. All right? I'll assign someone to do bed check on the rest of them. Make sure that everybody's in bed, assign somebody else to make sure that the light's out at a given time. That'll be their assignment. And they get a little more food and a little more this and a little more that, and a half a day off. I mean, where they don't have to go to the fields and work and whatnot or break no rocks or nothing like that, or either part-time or full-time. They don't have to do any of it at all. Depends on what they set up. But for the masses, you're going to be hurting full-time, because they don't have anything for you at all except hurt. And I'm setting up the school system right now. You can tell by the dropout rate and all like that, if you're not learning anything, you're not going to be welcome anywhere on the planet. Black males particularly certainly have to start really understanding that. There'll be no place for us in the future if we don't know how to do something that makes sense. Just being hustlers and fellows who can stand on the corner and curse everybody out in all kinds of different ways that we'll spend years learning how to do. And that's all you know how to do. And deal some drugs and fire 9mm, wildly up and down a street crowded with people. Now, there's not a lot of demand for that worldwide, and that demand is going to become less. And worldwide, people are more and more going to become less and less tolerant of it, because they're going to have to. The people of this planet, the way everything is going, the food shortages and all like that, people are going to have to become more and more sane and more of a capacity to do things that are needed, to act in the capacity of being able to do things that are needed. Even in death camps among the Nazis, we have some examples of that in history. The movie Schindler's List shows what? Oscar Schindler was able to go into a prison, and some of the people who were consigned to be executed, to be put into the ovens and burned, some of the people that the German soldiers had already written off. Every now and then they said, well, we can use some of these people because some of them have skills. And one prisoner even had to tell another one, said, what can you do? He said, well, I'm a musician. He said, hey, don't you dare tell them that. They don't need that. Not in this death camp. Said, now, tell them that you are a machinist. Because, see, in a prison, you got to have machines running. Because one part of the prison had been set aside to manufacture ammunition. And they even picked out one little fellow who said his hands were very small and they were going to execute him. But they said, yes, but we need someone with small hands who can examine the inside of the canisters of shell casings. Said, and you know, a person with large hands can't get their hands in there. Say, but this little fella can get his hands in there and he can feel if there are any imperfections, you know, inside the shell casings. So they say, oh, well, we can use him. So spare him. Don't kill him. That's somebody we can use. In the movie The Bridge on the River Kwai, they found out that the British soldiers that they had some skills in bridge building. And that's supposed to be based on a true story. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, well, we'll just let the rest of them die. I mean, you know, because we don't have no use for them. We don't have enough food to go around anyway. But we will feed these. Because this officer says he's got a staff here that knows something about how to put a bridge together. And we do need this bridge to get across this river. So these people have some skills. Now, the point that I'm making, every black person out here should try to learn every possible thing that they can learn that might be of constructive value. Because otherwise, we're not going to be welcome no place on this planet. And people are not going to tolerate our foolishness like they're doing now. There might come a time when they just start executing everybody who doesn't know how to do something that makes sense. And there'll be no room for a drug dealer when the only thing you can do is come forward and say that I was a pimp. I was a sweet daddy. You got a place for me. They say, oh no, people are starving to death. I mean, what are you talking about a place for you? Shoot him right now. You don't know how to farm, you can't drive a tractor, you can't fix a tractor. What have you ever learned that's worth anything? Well, I know how to stand around and call everybody MF all day. Well, we can't use that. You know anything else? No. Well, what are you doing on the planet? I don't know. That's how we look. That's why I say we're pitiful. But we better get serious. Because people all over the world, including some very ignorant people, realize that they are ignorant. And they know that the first thing they'd better do is learn how to do something that somebody needs.
Okay, well,
just keep learning. Always be in the learning mode. Be willing to learn even from your enemies. Because they know a whole lot.
Okay. Welcome to the group, Great Priestess and Queen Nzinga. We are live with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. If you have any questions for Mr. Fuller, don't hesitate to raise your hand, come to the mic, and you can ask your questions directly to Mr. Fuller. Welcome to the group, Sagittario. We're also broadcasting live on the Counter Racism Radio Network. There are listeners as well on the Counter Racism Radio Network if you're interested in joining the conversation. The instructions for how to do so, downloading Pal Talk and joining us in the Countering Racism group on Pal Talk, can be found on the counter-racism.com website. You can find that on the Counter Racism web calendar. Queen Nzinga, the topic under the Countering Racism group is always the same: how to replace the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice. Mr. Fuller, there were some additional questions that were emailed in. One of the emails states, and this is directed to you, Mr. Fuller, I think your comment about sex 2 times a week is very enlightening. I am currently with a very sex-charged Middle Eastern woman. I enjoy sex, but I'm not addicted. I would prefer to have sex once or twice a week, but she seems to think my sexuality is in question because I prefer to read or study than always be preoccupied with sex. And if I show no interest, she flirts with other men. Obviously, this isn't a healthy relationship, but I think there is a real truth in showing constraint and sensibility with dealing with sex. The person asks you for your comments.
Well, it seems like there might be just a mismatch there, but the initial thing to do that is that when you're doing it, you do try to satisfy the person to the max. See, when I say twice a week, on each one of those occasions, that's a guideline. It should be when you do it. I mean, you do it. If you understand what I mean. I mean, you really are into it. To satisfaction, just like anything else. You do what will, satisfy the person while you are doing it, so that you don't have to do it that many times. See, I mean, that's the whole idea. See, now it might be that the person, their demands are just something that you're out of balance. But now, that's something that you'll have to work out, because that's something that should have been. That's why it's not in the current code book, but it would be in the next one. Before you have sexual intercourse with anyone, you're supposed to know all of these things in advance. And you're supposed to know what is likely to happen when, by asking these questions, you ask questions like that. How many times do you usually, have sex? I mean, and some person might say, well, hey, 3-4 times a week, that'll do me. And another person says, well, every day, twice a day, maybe 4 times. Okay. With some people, I mean, that's what it takes.
Right.
But you want to know this up front.
Exactly.
And then you'd ask the next logical question. Well, now, if you don't get it on that basis, what do you usually do? Well, if I can't get it from you, I get it from somebody else. Well, see, now, this is supposed to be known before you have the first incident of sex. That's supposed to be known. That's why I say it should be around 200 questions, anywhere from 150 to 200 questions asked before any male with female has their first act of sexual intercourse. Because it's too late to start asking questions afterwards. Because that's when the confusion starts and the hostilities and the misunderstandings. Because it always winds up saying, I didn't know, or why didn't you tell me? Now, if you ask and answer all questions before the first act of sexual intercourse, there's no questions to ask. And you're not wondering ever about anything. Because the person can always say, well, you knew. I told you. You asked me, how many times I usually have sex, and say, well, hey, nothing less than 6 times a day would do me. Now, if that's the case, you should know that in front. And you even ask details, 6 times a day. 6 times a day, I mean, well, what do you call a time? And they say, well, at least 30 minutes per time, minimum. You say, well, that takes up most of the day. Well, now you're talking. Well, you should know that. You might say, well, I don't think
steady. We're broadcasting live from the Counter Racism Radio Network, and we're live in the Countering Racism group on Pal Talk with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. If you have any questions for Mr. Fuller, don't hesitate to raise your hand and come to the mic. Just going over a few of the questions that I've received in email from Mr. Fuller, and it appears as though the questions get longer and longer. They're almost paragraphs. As people don't take the time, it appears, to use the least amount of words to have the greatest impact. Someone did post a question in the text here on Pal Talk. Says they have a question, but they don't have a mic. Question is, since racism was created by white people and is being maintained by white people for the betterment of white people over many other generations, do you ever see racism ending as long as there are white people maintaining it? That's the question, Mr. Fuller.
As long as white people are maintaining it, there's only one type of racism according to the code, and that is white supremacy. So it takes white people to maintain white supremacy. Once the white people of this planet decide that they are going to go out of business, either directly or indirectly, or they make the decision either under pressure or simply because they want to change, then there's no more white supremacy. Now, there might be other problems, but they will be much easier to solve when there's no more white supremacy. That's the biggest problem on earth, is as it says in the code book, it's the greatest deterrent to the production of justice of any other form of deterrent to the production of justice on the planet. Now, there will be other problems, but they will be much easier to solve, because the system of white supremacy is not based on anything that's basically reasonable. That's why it's so difficult to eradicate. It's based on mistreating people based on their color. You look at someone and say, there's a person that I can mistreat, and nothing should be done about it. And they've gotten used to that. Just look at a person's color. Say, you're the wrong color, as if there's such a thing as a wrong color. Wrong for what? Because I said so. And what does that mean? It means that I'm supposed to mistreat you. That's what that means. And I'm supposed to base my whole life on mistreating you, because that's what white supremacy is about. It's an insane proposition. It's very efficient, and you can get a lot of material things done through that system, which is why a lot of people have gotten comfortable with it, because you can accomplish a lot with that system. And the evidence shows that a lot of accomplishments have been made through the system of white supremacy. But the problem is, it automatically manufactures throwaway people, because it's based on nothing but the mistreatment of people, deliberate mistreatment of people based on what? What the person thinks? How the person acts? No. Based on nothing but just looking at the person and say, you don't have the correct color. You have a color that's designed to tell me that I can mistreat you. And not only that I can mistreat you, that I should mistreat you. I should go and look for you with the purpose of mistreating you. Why? To make myself feel good. Now, that's the whole proposition of the system of white supremacy. a category of people who, if you're white, you have been taught that these people are here for the purpose of you mistreating them. That's what they are there for. That's why they are here. They are not here for any other reason except for you to round them up and mistreat them and come up with newer and better ways of mistreating them and having them do your bidding and teaching them all sorts of evil things. Have them doing silly things for your entertainment. That's what they're for. They are not for anything else. That's the whole concept of white supremacy right there.
There's another question that came to us via email, Mr. Fuller. The person writes, giving those in need of the most help first is contrary to my military training of giving help first to those that are most likely to live. Please explain which method of providing help is most logical and beneficial to the goals of counter-racism.
Yes, well, many military machines, depending on the circumstances, military arrangements, are made, first of all, on the basis of you're in the business of destroying, not building. And it's sort of what some people might call Darwinian, the survival of the fittest.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not the way the world is supposed to be run, because we're not supposed to be setting up to destroy anyway. In fact, counter-racist codification says we should stop glorifying anyone who's in the business of killing. So-called military funerals, military ceremonies, and all like that, greeting people, the traditional greeting, if one so-called dignitary or ambassador or something like that lands an airplane at an airport, the tradition is to meet that person with armed forces. In other words, there are people, what you call honor guards. And these honor guards, under one name or another, are people who are armed. The rifles, sometimes they fire rifles into the air. Or they stand there at attention, you might say, with bayonets fixed. Or they have some type of marching ceremony. Or they show some type of military weaponry. Tanks. Or guns. Cannon. Being pulled. To greet people who are visiting. When you stop and think about it logically, it is absolutely insane. That's not the way to greet anybody. If anything, you'll have people there. If you're going to show off what you have there in that particular place, you have people who are in the business of healing. You have teachers lined up with books in their hands. Or you have nurses standing there greeting people, saying we have so many thousand nurses, we have so many thousand doctors who are here. I'm going to show you that we have farmers here. And you have your farmers all lined up there, a contingent of farmers, saying, and introduce them as people who are experts in growing rice, experts in growing corn, experts in doing this and doing that. Something of constructive value. Not a bunch of people standing there with rifles. Hired killers. Is this the way to greet guests? But it's an old tradition, carried on everywhere. That should be abolished. They are necessary. I carried a nonsense. It's necessary to have people with guns or swords or something to deter aggression, but you don't ever glorify it. The white supremacists love to glorify that type of thing. That should stop. If you're a soldier, and I have been one, you get killed, you're just dead. Nobody should glorify you. Shouldn't be any parades for you. You're in the business of killing people. That should never be glorified, even for a just cause. If I go somewhere with the intention of killing somebody, and I wound up getting killed myself, well, you can just make the announcement that I'm dead. But there shouldn't be any parade, because you're inspiring people to be killers. Nobody should be inspired to be a killer. That's a whole nother way of thinking. But more than any people on earth, the black people should be the pioneers in starting that kind of thinking. Anywhere we go, we say, don't meet me with a military parade. Please, if you please, show me what you're doing to help people, not to kill people, not all ready to fight. Show me your tractor repairman, your inventors of things that are helpful to people. Somebody who came up with a new way of irrigating the land so you can grow food. Introduce me to these people. Not somebody who is known to have killed 500 people on a battlefield. No. A person will mention that as a matter of history if the person did it, but it's nothing to brag about. I killed 500 people on the battlefield, and it's really tragic that that had to be done. And don't give me any medals for doing it. Those people are dead. And I don't want anybody to be given a medal for killing me.
Are you there, Mr. Fuller? I think we've lost Mr. Fuller. Just a second, I'll see if I can get him back with us. Apologize for that. Not sure what happened. Welcome to the group, Miss Satin Silk. I know you've been sitting there for a while. I apologize for the late welcome. We have some additional questions for you in email and in the text, Mr. Fuller. Since Megaflex is here in the room with us and he is the person that's asking questions in text, I will proceed with the text questions first. So how do you make someone, white people, stop mistreating non-white people if they have been enjoying the benefits of white supremacy for so many years? That's one of the questions that Megaflex asks.
Through the counter-racist code. Everything should be codified. Thought, speech, and action. And that includes asking them to stop. Which plenty of people have been doing that. But you continue to ask, but at the same time you work to make them stop.
At the same time, you mean?
At the same time. Mm-hmm. You never stop doing that. As long as they're in business, you let them know that you are working to have them stop doing that kind of business. And you make no apologies for that ever. And you product in a system of white supremacy. You cannot have white supremacy, racism, and justice in the same universe at the same time. It does not compute. The only way you can have justice, or have the opportunity to produce it and maintain it, is in the absence of white supremacy and all other forms of non-justice. But that's the biggest one. So you have a duty to replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice, which means guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help in every area of activity, not just in some, including economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. War just means any kind of conflict, any kind of argument where one person is opposing another to the detriment of one or the other. That's the last area of activity. You want to do away with that altogether if you can, in order to maintain that concept of justice. All of religion should include that concept, if it's a religion worth having. Guaranteeing that no one is mistreated, guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most help. In education, in economics, in labor. I mean, the person's trying to lift a rock. I mean, help the person to lift a rock if it's for a constructive purpose. And then the person, might help you do something else. It's very basic, very simple, and very logical. But the white supremacists want to use racist logic. We have to use counter-racist logic. And we make no apologies for doing that, because that is what we should be doing. And you make that very clear. And you can even ask them, if you're not supposed to be doing that, what is it you're supposed to be doing? Maintaining this mess that we have? Because that's what it is. Mistreating people? Not helping people that need help the most? That's what we have. We have here on this planet alone everything that it takes to sustain the people in a constructive manner that's on this planet. Everything is already here. And we're making a mess of it because we're making a mess of each other.
So earlier, Mr. Fuller, you talked about what begging was. Are you talking about that non-white people should beg white people to stop mistreating them?
Oh, sure. There's no shame in begging.
When you're talking about begging, you're talking about just asking more than once, right?
You can ask more than once. I mean, you try to make your point as much as you can, but at the same time, you act while even as you beg when they are not moving in a manner that is commensurate with what they should be doing. Because they should be doing anyway. They should be doing justice. Everybody on this planet should be trying to produce a product called justice, whether they're white or non-white. Otherwise, you can't justify the air that you breathe. That's pure logic. Trying to be of constructive help. That's the whole purpose of being here. But the white supremacists are they just want to be non-constructive. They want to build up to tear down and think that that's some type of enjoyment, and teach their victims to do the same thing, which they have done an excellent job of.
Right. Okay, Michael Fisher has his hand up, but before we get to Michael Fisher's question, Queen Nzinga has Placed a question in the text. Welcome to the group ATL2NYC. Queen Nzinga asks, Mr. Fuller, what are your thoughts surrounding the situation of there possibly being a black president of the United Snakes associated with racism? That's the question.
Prepare yourselves, learning everything you can of constructive value, and go ahead with it, because you can prepare yourself for a multitude of disasters. Based on what? Based on logic. There's probable cause to believe, with the situation that we have, that you have a substantial number of white people who believe in white supremacy, who are also promoting Mr. Obama. Now, you should help to make Mr. Obama president. That's my suggestion, based on logic. But at the same time, keeping in mind and be willing to say in advance that he's being set up to fail. Now, it may not happen, but based on the circumstances that we have, all the evidence that we have, historical and otherwise, with this that's going on, you have probable cause to believe, even though it may not happen, and that you should hope and work that it doesn't happen. But at the same time, keep in mind that the white supremacists have been known to build people up to tear them down. That's a part of their package. They praise you one day and then tear you down and laugh at you the next. They have done that all through their history. Nurtured a person who is wounded practically from birth, restore them to excellent health, and build them up and build them up and build them up, and then tear them down, because they have a God complex, because, they think that that's the way what a God does: build up, tear down, build up, tear down. You have to assume that this is what they have in mind for Mr. Obama, and resist the urge to blame him for anything. Always blame the white supremacists for anything that anything that happens that shouldn't happen during the existence of white supremacy. The usual suspects are the white supremacists. Always say that, and always say it in advance, so you're not doing Monday morning quarterbacking. You're saying before, you might say, the Belmont, if you want to compare it to horse racing. You say, hey, he's set up to lose. It's rigged. He's not going to come in first, he's going to come in last. But everybody's been told he's going to come in first. Rick Brown. I tend to believe you can prepare a year from now that they'll be making jokes. Maybe. It may not happen. Let's hope that it doesn't. Let's work that it doesn't. But don't be surprised if it happens that a year from now they'll be saying, Big Brown Belmont Obama. That's who he is. Everybody put their money on that horse, and he came in last. He's the worst president we ever had. Or he simply didn't make it. Everybody thought he was going to make it. He never made it out of the gate. They found out something about him at the last minute and had to put in Mr. McCain or Miss Clinton.
Right.
He's completely disqualified. His mother was a member of the Communist Party. We just found that out yesterday, the day before he's supposed to be sworn in. The white supremacists are tricky. They're the master of the trick. Now you see it, now you don't. But don't despair, because we should be saying these things just like I'm saying it now. We'll believe it when it happens, and if he's successful, successful, we'll just breathe a sigh of relief if after 4 or 5 years or 6 years of Mr. Obama, if he happens to make it, and it's all prosperity and everything worked like clockwork and things got corrected and things improved and whatnot, well then we can just breathe, not applaud, because we should stop celebrating anything according to the logic. But we breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, things seem to be working pretty well, let's try to keep it that way and just go on. But if it turns out to be a complete disaster, put it in your minds now. The only reason it turned out to be a complete disaster was because the white supremacists planned it that way. And that will be the truth. Because they know how to make things successful.
Okay, welcome to the group, Foxy Lady. Michael Fisher has his hand up. Mr. Fuller, Michael Fisher, it's your mic, sir.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Fuller, it is my understanding, it is my understanding that powerful people who are classified as white classify people as non-white just based on the fact that they are able to do so. Now, that brings up another question for me. What assurance does a white person have that more powerful white people don't reclassify this white person as non-white? And if that can happen, wouldn't that logically be a factor in destabilizing the system of racism and white supremacy? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fuller.
Yes, and we should be aware of this. The white supremacists do the classifying. And periodically they have shown that they actually do this. They'll classify a person as white one day and non-white the next, if it's for their convenience. They are masters of deception, masters of the card trick, masters of change overnight, changing the rules. And they can do that. But you try to the best of your ability, point it out that they do this and when they do it. Because it's something that they have actually done. It's not anything that they're preparing to do. They have actually done this. In many instances, the whole idea is what? To cause confusion among their victims. Because anytime people are confused, you can control them easier. And they have every way that you can name when they want to throw their victims into confusion. So now they are talking about multi-racism and multiracial and all like that. There's no such thing as that. It's white, non-white, and white supremacists. These are the three categories. Stick with it. Now, when they change, what do you do when they say that, okay, this person is no longer white, this person is non-white? Then you will accept the person as non-white if the person functions as non-white. You don't have to worry about that. That's why we have the United Independent System. Because, see, you're not organizing against white supremacy anyway. You're unifying. That's a different thing. See, that's the difference between the four-wallism and open-airism. The United Independent concept is each individual functions as an individual. And if you get enough individuals functioning according to a counter-racist code, it doesn't make any difference what they try to do with the classifications. You just of individuals. You just know what you do. And you only go by, is this person being constructive and productive? And another thing, see, the only time people would worry about that, or they used to worry about it, or sometimes do now, is when they're trying to keep secrets. See, then they'll say, well, here's some white people around, so we can't say this or we can't do that. We have to do this just when we're among ourselves. That's always a mistake, because you're never just among yourself. If you're a victim of racism, the racist always knows what you're doing. You have to make that assumption. But then you don't need a secret. They do. You don't need to do anything confidential. You don't need to do anything in secret. You cannot keep a secret from them. You are subject to them. They know all of the methods of secret keeping. They are the biggest secret keepers in the world. So when you're trying to keep a secret, they know what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then last but not least, you don't need them. You don't need secrets. They need secrets. So therefore, it doesn't make any difference how they choose to classify people as they go along. As long as you know that they are doing this and that they can do it and will do it, you simply don't pay any attention to it. You just function according to the code yourself. And you know when somebody else is, because most of the time black people are not functioning according to a counter-racist code anyway, regardless of their classification. That's the key. You don't worry about it. You just be aware that they'll switch classifications anytime they want to. You just be aware that they have the power to do that. But if everybody's aware that they can do that and are doing it and all like that, they are actually in function. They will begin to confuse themselves more than anything else. And they know this. This is why they are not too fast and loose with switching classifications, because that has actually happened too. This is why I put into the code book the seeds of the destruction of white supremacy are built right into the system itself. This is why you can use their own words against them. These are their words. You don't have to come up with another language. They had us during the 1960s trying to study Swahili. I told people at the time when they first started trying to do that, I said, that's not going to help you to get out from under the white supremacists. That's just going to give you some type of artificial high, thinking that you're getting out from under them. I said, and for a very logical reason. I said, they know how to speak Swahili. They're the ones who will teach it to you. And not only that, the people who spoke Swahili and the people who do speak Swahili are under their thumb. How did that happen? If their language would keep them from being conquered, they wouldn't have been conquered. So their language didn't help them at all. You have to understand the language of the white supremacists. You have to study what they say and how they say it, not how you say things, just among yourselves. They know all about that. It's nothing that they don't know about that.
Okay, Mr. Fuller, here's a question that comes from Sin Q. Mr. Fuller, do you think that if white people stop calling themselves white, that it would be a step towards eliminating racism, white supremacy? That's the question.
No. That's not the evidence that we need to go on. Because, reason being, you watch what they do, along with what they say. And beyond that, you watch the result. Now, if it results in justice, nobody being mistreated, and everybody who needs help the most gets the most help, no problem. getting that result, then they're still in business, even if you can't quite figure out how they're doing it.
So that's the measuring stick, so to speak.
Hello?
Mr. Fuller?
Hello, I'm here.
I said, so that's the measuring stick, so to speak.
Always.
Yeah.
Nothing else will do. Rhetoric won't do, switching around titles and all this type thing. That's all window dressing. You always say, is there anybody being mistreated? That's what you ask at the end of the day. And are the people who need, the person who needs help the most, is that person getting it? The answer in both cases, first place is anybody being mistreated? The answer is no. Answer to the second question, yes, the person who needs help the most is getting that help. That's it. Now, if that's not happening, you consider that the white supremacists are still in business. And it doesn't make any difference what they say. I don't care how they say it or which way they come at it. You say, hey, I checked, and this is the end of the day. And people are still being mistreated, and people who need help the most are not getting it. So nothing
Hello?
all day long means anything at all. That's always the criteria. See, we have never had that finishing, that criteria. That's why we have always kind of just wandered. Because we say, well, we wanted integration, and we wanted power, and we wanted to be, some kind of vague, we just want things to change. We have all used all kinds of words that are too vague. But see, when you give it that frame of reference, is anybody being mistreated? Let's look around. Let's walk around and check. See if anybody got mistreated now. We started out this morning saying at the end of this day, nobody's supposed to be mistreated, and everybody who needed help, starting with the person that needed help the most, they got it. So let's check. We started out 5 o'clock this morning, and we said that at 5 o'clock this evening, everything should be done. Okay, 5 o'clock this evening. That's what it is now. Let's just go around and check. Now, if you find out, we found people still being mistreated. We found people that needed all kinds of help and not getting it. We found a person that needed help the most, didn't get it. Then we look at the white supremacists and say, you know what? You're still in business. And they'll say, well, we're not the ones. Yeah, you're the ones. You're in charge of everything. And that's the deal. Because that's the definition of justice, and you have not accomplished it yet. You're still in business. So we can just start out tomorrow morning with the same ritual. But we're going to still be working under the premises you're still in business, and we're going to work through the night, too. Because we don't stop. And that should be our position. It ain't personal. It's business. Results is the only thing that we're looking for. All the crying and the bleeding hearts and the wringing hands and the parades and all like that, that's nice. But at the end of the day, we got something to measure by. And we should keep that in mind.
All right, Mr. Fuller, there were some questions floating around in text in reference to something that you said earlier about asking white people to not to mistreat non-white people, but I think part of that message was lost. And the part I think that was lost was that, at the same time, the non-white people should be working toward replacing the system of racism, white supremacy with a system of justice. For some reason, that part of the message gets lost with non-white people. I'm not sure why that is.
The reason why is because we are having this conversation, but the message is in codification. once you say that, you're supposed to say, understand that everything is supposed to be codified. You don't leave out anything. Every move that you make is supposed to be a codified move. By codified means designed to get the correct result. Everything that you say and everything that you do. And that's everything, not some things. Not something that you're planning on doing in the future. Because that's what black people usually say. We say, well, the next generation will do this and do that. No. Codification is about what you do every day right now. Certain things you say, certain things you don't say when you talk to anybody. Like part of the code is black people are not supposed to be talking to each other unless they're talking about something constructive. Now that itself is very painful to most black people. I mean, that's pain like you wouldn't believe. Because we are not used to doing that. But I have even made remarks when black people see each other coming, they should go the other way until they think of something constructive to say or do. Otherwise, there shouldn't be any contact at all. None. Zero. And that includes with relatives, so-called kinfolks. If you can't think of something constructive to do, something constructive to say, you're not supposed to be in contact.
Right.
You say, well, we got a holiday coming up. We usually get together on holidays. Get together for what? Well, we just, enjoy each other's company. See, that's black people. That's fine in a utopia, but you're not in that. And then always talking about why things don't change. Things change when you make them change. That's where the change comes from. Now, like I said, that's a bitter pill to swallow. But once we start doing it, we'll find that we like it. Because too often, when black people get together to do anything, it turns out to be conflict and mess. And the reason why is because we didn't have a codified reason for doing so in the first place. If you don't have anything constructive to say, say absolutely nothing. And don't go looking for someone to say something to. Just because you feel like talking. Now, like I said, we are not used to that. We are very, very social people. We say. But actually, we are antisocial. Because too many of our contacts wind up being conflict. In the code book, it says no contact, no conflict. You cannot have conflict with somebody you're not in contact with. Now, I'm not saying we're not supposed to be in contact with each other. We're in contact with each other now. But we're talking about something constructive. And when we run out of something constructive to say, we're supposed to go the other way. We're supposed to get the heck away from each other. Why? Because the poison will take over. That's why. Any two black people stand around and they run out of something constructive to say, you better believe the next thing on the menu is going to be a lot of poison. And it's going to spread, even when they are not aware of it. Somewhere as we speak right now, black people who have made contact with each other, laughing and talking when they started off. Before the night is over, you're going to see yellow tape all over the place. That's not how it started out. They started out saying they're going to have some fun. They're going to get together and have some fun. And before the night is over, it's going to be yellow tape, police line tape, all over the place, all wrapped around trees. And tomorrow morning there will be little teddy bears and candle lights standing by fences. An old black lady standing out there saying they killed my nephew. We ought to be sick of that nonsense by now. But we don't know how to stop. somebody MF at 3 o'clock in the morning, we don't feel comfortable. And we write songs about it, glorifying that nonsense. Can't stand to be away from it.
Okay, Mr. Fuller. Michael Fisher, I see you have your hand up in the Countering Racism room. There are a couple of questions that came in while Mr. Fuller was talking. I want to get to those. One of them, which came in the form of an email to the webmaster account at counter-racism.com. The question states, or asks Mr. Fuller, why should victims of racism assist Mr. Obama in becoming president?
The reason is, why not? Somebody's going to be president. Why not? It's a roll of the dice. But why not? Because everything we do is a roll of the dice. We're under the system of white supremacy. Something constructive may come from it, but don't bank on it. But why not? Reason being why not, we have to learn how to get things done, which means we have to train. We have to educate ourselves. If no black person has ever been president, he might turn out to be the sorriest president that ever was, but at least he will learn something about being president and what a president is supposed to do. Even if he learns that he's got no power in that position, he'll learn that by being in the position. You can't learn what it feels like to sit in the cockpit of an airplane until you sit in the cockpit of an airplane, even if you don't even know what buttons to push. At least you know that much. You know you're sitting there. And you know that you don't know what buttons to push. But at least you know you're looking at them. That's a start. The alternative to that is to go somewhere and sit in a corner and do absolutely nothing. And that's the worst thing you can do.
I think somebody once said that the best way to learn how to play the violin is to play the violin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if you're making a whole bunch of noise, which is exactly what you'll be doing if you never played one.
Exactly.
The average person who picks up a violin does not sound like Bach or Mozart or Chopin or somebody. They sound like somebody you don't want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the first step. I tend to believe that that's what's being planned for Mr. Obama. One of the biggest failures in history. But I say go ahead anyway. Go ahead and sit down at the piano. And tell the audience, now, you're probably not going to like what you're going to hear because I don't know how to play this piano. But I'm sitting here, and so here goes.
Okay, we got a question that came in from SenQ, which states, and after SenQ, Michael Fisher, we'll get to your question. SenQ writes, in the code on page 1, Mr. Fuller mentions an effective number of victims of racism will result in a collective effect against racism. The question is, what is an effective number of victims of racism? That's the question, Mr. Fuller.
We'll know the effective number when the effective number has been effective. That's the answer. That's the scientific answer. In other words, well, it's like Truman and the bomb. He was asked, well, what do you think this no need to keep maintaining a system that's designed to mistreat people, even though without it, we might still have people mistreating people. But we know that this system is designed to mistreat people.
Yeah.
So we at least get rid of that. That's a start. And we'll work with whatever else we have to work with when we have to work with it.
Okay, Michael Fisher has his hand up. And after Michael Fisher's asked this question and you answered, Mr. Fuller, I want to get to another question that's in the text that Foxy Lady has posed. Michael Fisher, it is your mic, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Fuller, again, thank you very much for your being with us tonight. Now, there's an increasing number of white people who say that they are anti-racists and say that they practice anti-racism. Logically speaking, can there be such a thing as a white person who is an anti-racist? Thank you.
There are no people on the planet under the system of white supremacy or doing the existence of white supremacy who have proven that they are anti-racist. Why? What's the logical answer according to counter-racist logic? Because racism still exists. See, I sometimes, I always say that I am trying to be a counter-racist. Trying to be a counter-racist is not being one. I could never be charged during the existence of white supremacy, be truthfully charged with being a counter-racist, even though I say I'm trying to be a counter-racist. I also advocate that everybody be a counter-racist. Counter means being against racism, against white supremacy. But I have not proven at no time that I am against white supremacy. Why? Because white supremacy is still here. The proof of that pudding is in the eating. It's an either or. So if a white person says that they are anti-racist, there's no evidence of that. Because racism is white supremacy, and white supremacy is racism, and white supremacy still exists. So no person, white or non-white, has proven to be counter-racist or anti-racist. Now, I don't say that they're lying because the code does not allow me to say that. That would be name-calling. But the code does allow me to say that the statement that was made is not true based on evidence. Racism still exists. White supremacy still exists. It's the only show in town. So nobody has proven to be against white supremacy. Nobody. Because why? It's still here. That's why you prove that you were against it when it's no longer here. And you did it. You saw to it that it was no longer here. Now you have your proof. Otherwise, you got no evidence that your statement is true.
Right. Foxy Lady asked for a link for this presentation. It'll be in rotation on the Counter Racism Radio Network that can be found at www.counter-racism.com. Mr. Fuller, there doesn't seem to be any additional questions in the text, and no one in the Countering Racism room has their hands up at this time, although there were some additional questions via email. I think you kind of touched on this in answer to another question earlier. Corey Burnham, hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Corey. If I'm not, please don't hesitate to send me an email and get me going down the correct path. Corey writes, I find these dialogues constructive and very helpful. this is my utmost concern. Shouldn't we be conducting these discussions covertly? I mean, the white supremacists conduct all their discourses and planning privately and covertly. Would we not have greater success doing our most essential and crucial counter-racism dialogues and planning covertly? That's the question, Mr. Fuller.
I take that the use of the word covert means in secret. I think that might be what it means. I'll take it that that's what it does mean. And I think that I covered that earlier in the talk.
Right.
We don't need secrets. The white supremacists need secrets. Counter-racist ideology does not call for secrets. The textbook for victims of racism is not a secret book. It's available everywhere, I hope. And people have asked me sometimes about the white supremacists having access to my book and having access to things that I have said. And I said, of course, and I intend for them to have it. That's why I say it openly. You don't write a book unless you intend for everybody in the world to read it.
Right.
And you don't make statements certainly on a telephone or on the air or to anyone unless you intend for everybody to have access to it. Or at least if they want to have access to it, they have access to it. People have sometimes asked me, well, if the white supremacists have your code book, I mean, don't you think that they can use your code book against you? I said it's a counter-racist code. That's why we need a code. A counter-racist code will not help a racist. That's why it's counter-racist. It's like if you have a car in gear to go in reverse or to go forward, it's going to go the way that it's designed to do. Automobile, four-wheel, designed to go on a highway, will not fly. I don't care who gets in it. I don't care who's at the controls. It's not designed to do that. Counter-racist ideology is designed to help the counter-racist. It's not designed to help the racist. That's how you know that it is counter-racist. The racist picks it up, but there's nothing they can do with it. It won't do what the racist wants done. This is why I say we need a code like that. That way we don't have to have secrets. They need secrets. Counter-racism is based on truth. Racism is based on falsehood and the spread of falsehood, the spread of deception. We don't need to deceive anybody. We're not trying to fool anybody. They are. That's their stock in trade. We are countering that. So we can be open in everything that we do, warts and all. It won't work for them. Counter-racist ideology does not work for a racist ideology. A racist ideology works for a racist ideology. That's the math of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you know that it's pure.
Okay, Michael Fisher has his hand up. Michael Fisher, it's your mic, sir.
Yes, sir. That brings up another question. If white supremacists were concerned about counter-racist code, or are concerned about counter-racist code, why, in your opinion, are they not trying to suppress it or ridicule it or just cut off communications about it in any form or fashion? Thank you. About the book in particular.
They haven't made that effort because they are mathematical people. They have studied, I'm sure, counter-racist ideology, and then they have looked so far at who's listening, who's paying attention. Most black people have no interest in counter-racist ideology. That's number one. Many of them who have heard about it have no interest in it, and most people ideology and having a counter-racist code, which is the key to that ideology, meaning knowing what to do and what to say under every circumstance that will get done the things that need to be done. The racists have studied people like myself, like they study everything. And the only thing they do is exactly what anybody should do if they're trying to accomplish something. Look at the effect. And they'll say, and nobody's listening to that. So as long as nobody's paying any attention to it, and even some people who understand what is being said, they are not acting on it. They act according to their habits. They continue to do things the way they have always done it without changing not one thing at all. So when the racists take their assessment, they say, hey, we can keep doing business as usual. We don't have to worry about this. And they continue to do it. And this is why they don't try to suppress it. I will know that counter-racist ideology is taking root when they start hurting me for doing it. That will be the tip-off. Because anytime you're really effective against white supremacy, whoever's being effective starts feeling it. In other words, I'm working to bring hurt on myself. Because that's what you'll get when you're serious and you're taking effect, no matter how serious I might be. Like I've used the expression that I've heard other people use. The white supremacists, when they go among a bunch of black people, they don't look so much at the speaker. They watch the audience. And if the audience is not acting on what the speaker said, they don't really pay too much attention to the speaker. They let the speaker just keep speaking. Speaker can keep speaking forever. If the audience doesn't change, they couldn't care less. Because that's the whole point for speaking. Bringing about a change in the behavior of the people who are listening. They don't care about debates. They listen to black people all the time, sit on panels and debate back and forth. Then everybody gets up and goes to the back of the room and eats chicken. And absolutely nothing changes. And the white supremacists observe that. They are very scientific. They're saying they're still wanting to do the same things they have always done. They don't want to do anything different. So they can say anything they want to say. Let them talk. Their behavior is not changing. They're still running up and down the street, shooting each other and whatnot. Hey, it's all good for our business. Not helping them at all. I don't care what they say. I don't care how much time they spend talking about black this and black that and black people's problems and whatnot. Doesn't make any difference what church they go to and how much they moan and whatnot and all like that. As long as they come out doing the same things they have always done, we don't have anything to worry about. It just means they're well trained by us. That's what it means. Their behavior is absolutely the same as it was 100 years ago.
Welcome to the group All Night Long, Miss Tuesday, and Jazz for Life. This is a live conversation with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., the author of the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. If you have any questions from Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., don't hesitate to raise your hand, come to the mic, and ask your question directly to Mr. Fuller. Mr. Fuller, we just received another question via email. What is Mr. Fuller's view on poor, quote-unquote, poor white people joining victims of white supremacy to combat racism? That's the question.
So-called poor white people are, first of all, white people. So white people, according to the code, all they have to do, if they believe in justice, is not join with anybody except other white people and work to produce a product called justice. They don't have to even speak to white person on anything.
Right.
Any white person doesn't need to join with a white person to do anything. They are already where the action is. All they have to do is just take the position of what they're going to do as a white person in the white world, because that's where they are. They're not in the black world just because they don't have money. They're still white. Every white person knows that. Every black person knows that there's value in being white. So a so-called poor white person who believes in justice, all they have to do is just start dealing with the white people who are not practicing justice, which they are not doing it themselves, and start having influence in doing so. And they don't need a black person nowhere around to help them do any part of it. They have greater influence than any black person ever has.
Under the system.
Under the system of white supremacy.
Right.
One white person can find it easy, much easier, to talk to another white person than a black person can in the system of white supremacy. So what do you need a black person for? But there are white people who will come around and they will say, well, I need to be around black people in order to deal with other white people. That doesn't make sense. That's not logical. If you stop and think about it, it's not logical. I'm going to repeat it. A white person doesn't even have to say good morning to me in order to go to other white people to get the things done that need doing. Stop and think about it.
Megaflex put in the text, what is the email address to post questions? Well, it's preferable, Megaplex, that people come to the mic and ask their questions directly to Mr. Fuller. And that's why, when we're able to get Mr. Fuller on the line with us, which is not very often, we'll attempt to do it more often in the future, but anytime we're able to get Mr. Fuller on the line with us, and if you have questions for Mr. Fuller, you should, we advertise on the Counter Racism website. That's www.counter-racism.com. When we're going to be broadcasting live on the Counter Racism Radio Network, and that we will attempt to get Mr. Fuller on the line with us. So you should bring your questions at that particular time to the Countering Racism group on Pal Talk. We even have instructions on the website on how a person can download the Pal Talk client to their PC and install it and join us in the Countering Racism group. Although there are people who are also listening on the Counter Racism Radio Network currently. We have about 10 or 12 people, last time I checked, that are listening on the Counter Racism Radio Network. But the preference, of course, is to think about your questions beforehand and get them refined to the point that they're direct, where you can get the information that you need and bring those questions with you. When we're in the Countering Racism group, and we have Mr. Fuller 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 Countering Racism